This video is sponsored by Hunt a Killer. When Beth Ferris Hendricks' death is declared an accident in the small town of Mallory Rock, Maine, her sister Gwen sets out to prove Beth was murdered. Gwen, having grown up on the New England island, must investigate the residents she has known all of her life. To catch the killer, Gwen will need your help to expose her hometown and uncover the secrets that exist on Mallory Rock. Hunt a Killer's subscription service provides a monthly box of detailed clues for you to examine so that you can complete monthly tasks that will help you identify Beth's killer. Hunt a Killer isn't just about solving a case, however. The game creates an ongoing narrative that provides insight into Beth's life and the town of Mallory Rock itself. As you go through each box, you'll watch a complex story unfold as you learn about the backstories of each of the suspects and their complicated relationships to Beth. As the weather gets colder and I'm spending more time indoors, having an activity that is so engaging and immersive helps keep me from spending my free time just watching TV all winter. One of my favorite things about Hunt a Killer is that each box purchased helps fund the efforts of the Cold Case Foundation. As you work to solve a fictional mystery at home, your purchase is supporting the work of real law enforcement professionals trying to solve actual cold cases. Right now, you can go to huntaKiller.com/heavycasefiles and use code HEAVYCASEFILES for $10 off of your purchase. Again, make sure to use code HEAVYCASEFILES for a $10 discount. "85-year-old Robert Huntback and his wife, 77-year-old Goldie, loved their longtime home at 311 West 10th Street in Waterloo, Iowa. In the summers, the quiet couple would sit out back on their glider swing and talk with neighborhood children as they were out playing. Unfortunately, in 1981, the couple's time at their house was coming to an end. The house was take to be torn down in 1984 as part of a State Department of Transportation plan to expand nearby U.S. Highway 218. The couple decided to take advantage of their need to relocate to move closer to their children in Independence, east of Waterloo. They had received an advance on the buyout of their current home and were going to use that money to move out to Independence. Robert and Goldie's family last spoke to them on Saturday, January 10th, 1981. The following Monday, the 12th, a concerned family friend called police when neither Robert nor Goldie answered their door. When police entered the house, they found the couple's bodies, Robert in the dining room and Goldie in the upstairs hallway. They had both been shot. They were also both bound, gagged, and blindfolded. Goldie had a clothespin pinned on her nose. Robert had sustained injuries from some sort of blunt object and had injuries which appeared to have been caused by an electric cattle prod that was found in the master bedroom. The home had been ransacked. Police believe robbery had been the motive for the crime. Despite authorities conducting dozens of interviews and offering a $5,000 reward, the case went cold. The case would not be solved for more than 31 years, and not by police efforts, but as the result of a spontaneous confession. On May 8, 2012, 66-year-old Jack Wendell Purcell walked into the Waterloo police station and confessed to the murders. Authorities did not just take his word for it, however, and Purcell was questioned extensively for 2 days. Police went through their files to compare the details of the crime with those provided by Purcell. Some of the details of the crime, like the number of bullet wounds and their location, as well as the color of the cattle prod used to torture Robert, could not have been known by anyone outside of law enforcement besides the killer. Investigators went through newspaper archives to ensure they were correct about what information had and had not been made available to the public. Purcell was charged with the murders and remained in custody while investigators continued to work to validate his claims. This involved traveling to California, where Purcell had been living. They tried to search his apartment, but he had sold everything he owned. The proceeds from those sales had been deposited into a bank account Purcell had turned over to authorities to pay restitution to the Huntback family. While in California, they also interviewed Bruce Davis, a former member of the Manson family, who was serving life in prison for murder. Purcell had told police that he had confessed to the murders to Davis, who was active in ministry at the prison where he and Purcell were incarcerated 20 years earlier. Davis had denied any knowledge of the murders when investigators talked to him over the phone, but when they came to see him in person, he confirmed that Purcell had confessed to the murders to him 20 years earlier. Purcell had been in prison with Davis while serving time for multiple counts of oral copulation with a minor. A warrant for his arrest for those charges was out when he killed Robert and Goldie. He had been on the run from authorities in California, trying to avoid facing the charges. He had dated a relative of the Huntbacks recently, and took a bus to Waterloo in order to rob the couple. He killed them after they recognized his voice. He took between $5,000 and $6,000 during the robbery. He then flew from Waterloo to Chicago and remained transient until he was arrested while hitchhiking in Wyoming and returned to California to face his pending charges. He began serving a 21-year sentence in September of 1981. He was considered a person of interest in Robert and Goldie's murders, and authorities had tried to interview him twice while he was incarcerated about the case, but he had asked for a lawyer both times. Purcell was paroled in 1992 and fully discharged from his sentence in 1995. He worked as a truck driver for many years before retiring and had been living in Southgate, California, prior to turning himself into the police in Iowa. Purcell had turned himself in because he had become a born-again Christian and believed it was the right thing to do. Shortly before he turned himself in, Purcell had called his brother, who was living in the Midwest and hadn't spoken with him in years, and confessed to the murders. The brother has spoken to the press, but asked not to be named. The brother was shocked at the confession, but agreed to help Purcell turn himself in. Purcell flew from California to Des Moines, where his brother picked him up at the airport and drove him to Waterloo. Unfortunately, Purcell did not know where the police station was, and his brother had never even been to Waterloo. It took some time for them to locate someone who could give them directions on how to get there, but they ultimately arrived at the station, and Purcell confessed to the murders. Purcell pled guilty to 2 charges of murder in the first degree, and his sentencing hearing was on June 7, 2012. He carried a Bible into court with him, and told the judge that he was a Christian who threw himself on the mercy of the court and of the family of his victims. He believed that by taking responsibility for the murders, it would prevent him from going to hell. "I was forgiven of the sins of murder because I repented and was remorseful," he told the court. Purcell's confession did not earn him forgiveness from Robert and Goldie's loved ones. 2 of the Huntbacks' 3 children had passed away prior to their parents' case being solved. Approximately a dozen of the couple's relatives were in the court for the sentencing, and one of Robert and Goldie's grandsons and one of their granddaughters addressed the court. The grandson did not share Purcell's belief that he was guaranteed to not be condemned in the afterlife because he confessed in this life. "Someday you will face another judge. He will hear you and there will be a sentencing. What that sentence will be, nobody knows. But if I had any input or any say in that, may your eternal life burn in hell," he said to Purcell during the sentencing. The couple's granddaughter told the court she hoped Purcell would rot in prison, and that she wished Iowa had the death penalty. Purcell was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the mandatory sentence for first-degree murder under Iowa state law. He is serving his sentence at the Iowa State Penitentiary. Gwendolyn Elaine Fogel was born and raised in Orangeburg, South Carolina. In 1972, at the age of 20, she moved to Walterboro, South Carolina, and began working as a laboratory assistant at the regional hospital. She later left that position to become a medical assistant to one of the town's most prominent doctors. By 1978, she had begun taking classes at a local college to complete her degree, as well as art classes to further her goal of becoming an artist. Elaine had an endearing air of shyness about her, but she made friends easily. Both her relatives and her co-workers said she was always willing to go out of her way to help others. She was a hard worker, and the doctor she worked for would later say that he did not know of any finer person than Elaine. 26-year-old Elaine spent the evening of May 27, 1978, babysitting the children of 2 of her friends. The parents arrived home at 11:15. Elaine told them that she would be stopping at a nearby convenience store on her way back home. This meant that she would probably arrive at her home on South Lemax Street around 11:30. Elaine's roommate Nancy and friend Billy had spent Saturday at an Amway products fair. It had been held approximately 150 miles away, so they did not arrive back at the home on South Lemax Street until 1:45 in the morning on Sunday. They were surprised to see that the light in the living room was still on. Elaine was spending Sunday with her family back in Orangeburg, celebrating her mother's birthday. She had talked a lot about the trip because she was so excited to see her family and to celebrate with them. Nancy and Billy were therefore surprised that Elaine was up so late when she had to start a long drive in the morning. Sensing something was wrong, Billy decided to walk Nancy inside rather than just drop her off. She gave him her keys and he walked ahead of her to the house. When he opened the front door, he was met with a horrifying sight. Elaine, half naked, covered in blood, and lying on the living room floor. Nancy and Billy ran back to the car and drove to the police station. The station was only a mile away, so driving there was faster than stopping to try to find a phone in the middle of the night. When officers arrived back at the house, they could not find Elaine's pulse. Neither could the paramedics, who arrived right after the police. Elaine's autopsy would reveal that she had been raped, beaten with several blunt objects, and strangled. She had sustained severe head wounds, and defensive wounds showed that she had fought back against her attacker. The doctor who performed the autopsy would ultimately conclude that Elaine had died of asphyxiation after being strangled with a fire poker that was found wrapped around her neck. Her killer must have been exceptionally strong, as he had bent the metal poker in half around Elaine's neck. It took 2 people to unbend the poker enough to remove it from her body at the autopsy. Elaine's parents were devastated by their daughter's death, and some of the circumstances of it only added insult to their injury. They were notified of Elaine's death at approximately 3:30 in the morning of May 28th, Elaine's mother's birthday. Elaine's father was horrified to hear that Elaine had been found with her fire poker wrapped around her neck because he had given the poker to her to keep by her door to use to protect herself. Police found footprints under all the windows along the back of Nancy and Elaine's home, indicating that the killer had tried to gain entry into the house at all of them before finally getting inside by breaking the glass of the dining room window and entering through it. The home had been found in disarray. Nancy's room appeared to have been gone through, and the living room showed signs of the fight Elaine had put up against her killer. Police theorized that the killer was already inside of the house when Elaine returned home. They believed that he potentially had broken into the home initially to commit burglary, and only decided to commit the sexually motivated murder when Elaine unexpectedly arrived home. The only item determined to be missing was Elaine's keyring. Since she had keys to the doctor's office where she worked on it, authorities became concerned that the killer had taken it to try to gain access to the office so that he could steal drugs. The doctor had all of the locks at his office changed immediately. Police watched the office for weeks in case someone came to try to break in with Elaine's keys, but no one ever did. The Walterboro Police Department had support from SLED, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. Potential suspects were identified, but no arrests were made, and the case went cold. Elaine's father died 2 years after she did, and her mother passed away in 1999. Despite the passage of time, Elaine's sister and extended family did not give up on her case. In 2015, leading up to the 37th anniversary of Elaine's death, her family wrote to the Walterboro Police Department asking for the case to be reopened. The department honored the request, and it was assigned to Detective Gene Johnson. As he began his investigation, he contacted retired Lieutenant Rita Schuler, who had retired from SLED in 2001. She had been the supervisor of the SLED Forensics Photography Lab in 1978 and had processed the photographs of Elaine's crime scene. She became close with Elaine's family when she was doing research on the case for her 2009 book, Small Town Slayings in South Carolina. The 2 investigators hoped that advances in technology could help them finally identify Elaine's killer. The case file indicated that biological evidence had been recovered from Elaine's underwear, which had been found on the couch in her living room, leading them to hope that they had DNA evidence. Scientists were able to develop a DNA profile from the evidence, but it was a mixed sample, containing DNA from Elaine and from an unknown male. Mixed samples are harder to match in databases, and investigators were unable to find a match in the combined DNA index system. Detective Johnson began collecting dozens of DNA samples from previous suspects identified in the case file and other men connected to the case. None were a match. It was not until Lieutenant Schuler remembered that they had another avenue of investigation that could help them identify Elaine's killer that progress was made in the investigation. The case file indicated that 2 unknown fingerprints and an unknown palm print had been found at the crime scene. However, the fingerprint lift cards for those prints were not with the case file. This would have been a major problem had Lieutenant Schuler not been working on the case. She had processed photographs of the fingerprints back in 1978 and remembered where she had filed the negatives of those photos. She called a current fingerprint examiner with SLED and told him where to look for the negatives. He was able to locate a photograph of the partial palm print, and the quality of the photograph was good enough that he was able to run the print through the automated fingerprint identification system. The system quickly returned a match. The print belonged to now 59-year-old James Willie Butterfield. His fingerprints were also matched to the 2 prints found on Elaine's window. Butterfield had an extensive criminal record going back decades. He had been arrested at least 10 times under his legal name and other aliases for crimes ranging from burglary to assault to unlawful removal of a body. He was charged with first-degree criminal sexual conduct in 2010, but the charge was dropped. However, his DNA was never entered into CODIS. His DNA was collected after his prints tied him to Elaine's murder, and it was found to be a match to the DNA from the crime scene. On December 1st, 2015, Butterfield was arrested and charged with murder, first-degree criminal sexual conduct, and first-degree burglary. However, he has never stood trial for these crimes. At the time of his arrest, he was confined to a secure mental facility. He had been placed there following earlier criminal charges. At a hearing in July of 2017, a judge ruled that Butterfield was not mentally competent to stand trial for the charges he faced in connection to Elaine's case. He was to remain at the secure facility, where he will most likely spend the rest of his life. Elaine's loved ones were understandably upset that Butterfield would not be punished for killing her, but are glad to have answers after more than 37 years. Sharon Schollmeyer was a clever and confident teenager whose adventurous nature inspired her to strike out on her own at a very young age. At just 15 years old, she moved out on her own, living at the Oxford Manor Apartments in downtown Salt Lake City, Utah, and supporting herself by working as a waitress at the nearby Lamb's Grill. Sharon's mother, Sally, did not want her daughter to leave home so young. However, she understood that fighting her over the decision would just alienate Sharon from her, so she accepted the decision in order to maintain their relationship. Near the end of 1977, 16-year-old Sharon was unhappy living at Oxford Manor. Someone had broken into her apartment and robbed it a few weeks earlier, and she felt some of the other residents were too rowdy. On December 3rd, she and her mother spent the day looking for a new apartment. Ultimately, Sharon decided to make it through the next few months at her current apartment until her lease was up, so that she would get her deposit back and be able to use it to move into a new apartment. 2 days later, Sally received a phone call from the restaurant where Sharon worked. Sharon had not reported for her shift, which was not normal behavior for the responsible employee. Sally then went over to Sharon's apartment to check on her. Sharon did not answer the door. Sally then went downstairs to see the building manager and told him she needed to get into her daughter's apartment. He brought his set of keys up to Sharon's unit and let Sally inside. He waited in the living room while Sally searched the rest of the apartment. In the bathroom, Sally discovered her daughter's lifeless body in the bathtub. Sharon was nude, with a halter top used as a gag in her mouth and a scarf wrapped around her head as a blindfold. There were approximately 6 inches of water in the tub, as well as some pieces of rope, and a butcher knife was outside of the tub on the bath mat. Sharon had been suffocated, strangled, and raped. There were no signs of forced entry into Sharon's apartment. Police conducted a thorough investigation. The case went cold, but it would ultimately be solved decades later, thanks to evidence preserved by the original investigators. In 2013, evidence from the case was submitted to a private lab where it underwent MVAC DNA testing. This type of testing allows for DNA to be extracted from non-ideal testing surfaces, such as porous ones. A full male DNA profile was extracted from the halter top that had been used to gag Sharon. The DNA was not run through the combined DNA index system until December of 2016. There was a match. 59-year-old Patrick Michael McCabe of Bell, Florida. McCabe was already known to police in Salt Lake City. He had been the building manager who let Sharon's mother into the apartment back in 1977 and had called 911 reporting the discovery of the body. Police now knew that when he let Sally into the apartment that day, he knew she would find her daughter's body and the state she would see her in. Imagine the gall, that he walked up to that door and walked in with me, knowing what he had done, Sally would later say at McCabe's sentencing. McCabe had left Utah 2 months after Sharon was killed. His DNA was in CODIS because he had committed a sexual offense against a minor in 1999. He was convicted and served time in prison. He was extradited to Utah in early March of 2017 and charged with aggravated sexual assault, aggravated burglary, and murder in the first degree. Under current Utah law, the murder charge would be aggravated murder, but McCabe had to be charged using the legal language in place in 1977. By this time, he had already confessed to Sharon's rape and murder to authorities in Florida. According to McCabe, on the night of the murder, he had come home with sexual fantasies, but his girlfriend was asleep. He therefore used the keys he had as part of his job as the building manager to enter Sharon's apartment. When later asked in court what his motivation for entering the apartment that night was, he admitted that he had gone there with the intention of raping Sharon. He took a knife from the kitchen and entered Sharon's bedroom, where she was sleeping. He woke her up and used the knife to subdue her. He tied her up and raped her before taking her to the bathroom, where he strangled her and held her head underwater in the tub. On April 24, 2017, as part of a plea deal, McCabe pled guilty to 2 first-degree felonies, aggravated burglary and murder in the second degree. The sexual assault charge was dropped and the murder charge was reduced. This deal meant that McCabe would not face the death penalty. Sharon's family was relieved that they would not have to go through a trial, and they were not opposed to the death penalty being taken away as a potential sentence, as their main concern was ensuring McCabe could no longer hurt other people, a goal that could be accomplished by sending him to prison. Sharon's younger sister, Bridget Love, did express in court at McCabe's sentencing in June that she was not happy with the fact that McCabe was not being held accountable for her sister's rape. On June 7, 2017, McCabe was sentenced to 5 years to life for each of the crimes he had pled guilty to. The 2 sentences would be served consecutively. McCabe's arrest provided Sharon's family with some degree of peace that had eluded them for almost 4 decades. In December, when we got the call that they found him, I realized we had been living under a cloud for 39 years, Sharon's sister Bridget said at the sentencing. It's like the sun is actually starting to shine for us.